This 1987 Mazda RX7 FC belongs to my kid. He bought it. Now, he traded a broken dirt bike for what was a completely broken car. He dragged it home on a trailer, pulled it into the shop, and here it sat for a year while we worked through it. Tried to fix the thing, tried to make it run, rebuilt the engine. It was quite the journey. Well, we got to a point where the car would start once each day, and then it wouldn't start again. And that's how it was when Bryson left. Bryson's gone. He's left home to serve a mission for the church where he funds his own way to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with people in another area. While he's gone, I'm seeing what I can do to this car to make it be just a little better than when he left. I'm first and foremost focused on the mechanicals. I went through the injectors, replacing some cheap high impedance injectors with quality low impedance injectors. More on that in a minute. I patched up vacuum leaks, fixed the power steering, fixed the brakes, and installed gauges so I can see what the engine is doing. I got all the latches, cables, releases, door handles, and windows, including the sunroof, working. I worked through all of the interior lighting, including the door courtesy lights, the dome light, the dash lights, and even the rear hatch light. I installed a stereo with new speakers, new antenna, and a subwoofer with an amp. That's a mechanical necessity. I replaced the rear view mirror with a dash cam unit that has a backup camera and an auto record mode that starts recording if it senses the car has been bumped. I found some wheels and tires that give the car a much more aggressive look. And while installing them, I painted the brake calipers and installed Megan Racing coilovers. I have a complete black interior out of an anniversary edition. Door cards, carpet, headliner, the trim pieces, the whole nine. So I pretty well need to gut the interior to get all that new stuff in. While I'm at it, when Bryson first put this together, he didn't have the heater parts, the motors and the blower doors and the controllers. So there's nothing behind the dash. And there's no good way to put that in without pulling the dash. So the whole dash is coming out. I can't say I'm very excited about that job, but I'm kind of excited to have a heater in it. I have two wiring gremlins that I'm trying to work through. Number one, the turbo pressure sensor reads battery voltage at the plug, and it shouldn't. I'm talking about the line that comes from the sensor to the ECU. I've tried disconnecting all kinds of plugs to try to isolate that, but it doesn't seem to matter. No matter what I do, I got battery voltage at that plug. So I want to trace those wires while things are taken apart. I hooked up a fuel pump shutoff switch and I wired it into the main wire. Really, that switch should be wired to the relay. What that does is reduces the amount of current flowing through the switch. It's worked just fine, and probably the switch can handle it, but the switch is more likely to wear out with that much current flowing through it, and you're more likely to have a potential problem down the road. So while I've got the steering column torn apart, I want to move that wire from the main trunk wire back to the pump to now the relay, which is right there at the steering column. All of the heater components are working, which is kind of exciting, and actually it's kind of a relief because I had to assemble all of those parts from different sources, piece everything together and try to make it work. The Logicom board was problematic. I had to take it apart and resolder all of the leads on the circuit board. It took a couple of attempts, but I finally got that crazy thing to work. So now all of the actuators are working for the doors that direct the airflow, the blower fan is working, and as far as I know, the temperature is working, but that one I won't really know until I get the thing running a little bit. The wiring was a complete disaster. Somebody had hacked it up. It looks like they converted it from low impedance fuel injectors to use high impedance fuel injectors. Why someone would do that, I really don't know, but I've reversed all of that. More problematic, they took all of the lines that came out of the injector controller slash resistor and plumbed them back into the main trunk. So it was throwing off all of the readings that were going to the ECU, including the one that then also goes to the turbo boost gauge. Fingers crossed, the turbo boost gauge will probably work now. Now that I've completely redone the wiring, I think we're in good shape. I've reset the wiring to stock, meaning it now runs through the controller resistor, and the low impedance fuel injectors that I put on the car some number of months ago are now the right fit. Hopefully nothing has gone really wrong by having low impedance injectors in a car that was actually wired for high impedance. The whole resistor was bypassed. I'm not sure what the ramifications are of sending full battery voltage back to the ECU when the ECU is expecting between 0 and 5 volts to indicate intake manifold pressure. It means that instead of 5 volts, it's getting 12, and the more voltage, the more boost, which means that the ECU thinks that there's a ton of air in there, and it therefore has to send in a bunch of fuel to match up with the air. That might explain why the engine seems to be running rich. Similarly, I don't know what the ramifications are of having an airflow sensor that should deliver between 0 and 5 volts to the ECU, deliver a constant 12 volts to the ECU. There again, I suspect the ECU thinks there's a whole lot more air than there really is. There were 2 other sensors that were patched in as well, a air bypass solenoid and a port side valve bypass controller solenoid doohickey. I don't even know what they were. Both have been deleted. None of it can be good. Having all of those things fixed should improve the way the car runs. Having the injectors wired up the way they're supposed to be should avoid problems like potential engine flooding, and in this case, potentially burning up the wires because the resistance in the injector is so low that the amperage would be high. The small wires can't even handle that. So that was really kind of a bad situation. At this point, the engine is put back together. It's running. I'm excited about that. The heater core plumbing is now poking through the firewall, and I've plumbed that into the coolant lines. So now the coolant will flow through the heater core on the inside of the car. The interior is still in shambles. The dash is out, but I have new carpet in, I have new black door cards in, I have the heater components mostly in. There are a few little things I need to round out there. Next up is to replace all the trim pieces around the window and up along the side, the B-pillar and the A-pillar, as well as the headliner and the sunroof cover. I have black parts to put in there. I also have black seat belts to replace the blue seat belts. By the time I'm done, there should be very little blue left in the car. The door jambs will still be blue and the engine compartment will still be blue. But really from the interior perspective, there won't be much, if any, blue left to be seen. You'll have to look pretty hard to find it. We'll give the new panels a quick wipe down. Mostly I'm pulling off dust from storage. These retainer clips on the backside make me nervous. They rust up and they get stuck, and then plastics break when you try to take them back apart. This looks like it's missing one, so I'm going to replace that one. And then I'm going to give it a squirt with this rust and corrosion protection. This is actually built by Boeing. It's pretty cool stuff. Putting a quick layer of this stuff over any rusty or prone to rust components will tend to prevent the rust without having to deal with paint. From what I understand, it will leave a little layer of paraffin. I'm really happy with the way the interior's coming together. It looks so good. To put this in perspective, this is the first time since we've owned this car that the glove box has been installed. I had to build a striker for the latch on the glove box because I couldn't find one. I don't know if we have one. If we do, it's buried in some parts bin somewhere. So I had to assemble that separately, but finally we have a glove box installed. We've come a long way on this interior, from bare bones and missing pieces and a cracked up dash to what is really pretty well refined. All of the little trim pieces are in place in a way that makes the car feel finished. How do you think Bryson will react to that? I had an interesting challenge with the engine. My idle got erratic. It wouldn't hold an idle when it was cold. My theory is that the wiring snafu I cleared up earlier was masking some problems with intake manifold vacuum. Consider this. Because the ECU felt like there was more air in the system due to voltage going from the signal off of the airflow meter and voltage off of the pressure sensor, as well as the 2 other solenoid doohickey whackers that I don't even know what they are, it was sending additional fuel into the system. And so a vacuum leak wouldn't have registered in the system at all. I assumed a vacuum leak, but the thing was evasive. I couldn't find it using typical spray techniques, so I had to take a different approach. I built 2 different adapters that allowed me to pressurize different portions of the intake, one for the lower intake manifold, one from the upper intake manifold, all the way through the throttle body. And I found a couple of critical vacuum leak points, one being the joint between the throttle body and the upper intake manifold, and the other being the joint between the upper intake manifold and the lower intake manifold. There is a gasket there. Maybe it's just old, I don't know. I put just a little bit of silicone in there and it sealed it up quite well. Now it's running like a top again. So the interior is in pretty good shape. Aside from a couple little odds and ends and here's and there's, I'm gonna call that good. The engine, Seems to be running pretty well. I'll test that for a little while just to make sure that all the changes I made to the wiring harnesses aren't going to creep up some gremlin that is unexpected. I think it's better than it's ever been, but only time will tell. Now I get to start thinking about the exterior. I don't know exactly what I'll do here, but I do have a couple of ideas. The first one is that because there are some dingers in the car, I'm going to start by remedying those. I'll pull them where appropriate, do a little Bondo where appropriate. The hood has a couple of spots that are completely bare. Once those are repaired, I think I'll do some black matte primer on the hood and potentially run it that way for a while. The rest of the car needs to be sanded down. It's got a really funky texture, like it was painted with a crayon. At a minimum, it needs to be sanded down so it can be smooth. Then from there, it can either be primed and painted or potentially just wrapped. I don't know. We'll see where it goes from there. Wish me luck, that's the next stage of the journey. Now, will you do me a big favor? Not because you're gonna miss any critical content or because you're gonna be part of some cool club or because you're gonna win some massive amounts of money, but because it would make me feel better, would you hit the subscribe button? 96% of you are not subscribers, and it kinda hurts my feelings just a little bit. It would mean a lot to me and my fragile ego if you'd smash that subscribe button. And while you're at it, would you hit the like button? It helps promote the content on YouTube, so do me a favor, will you? Till next time, be well.